My name is Susheila Nasta. I founded the New Writing Prize in 2009, and I've got Margaret Busby here today, who was one of the first judges and is chair of the judges this year in its 15th anniversary year. This is a really important year, 2024, for the prize, but it also marks Wasafiri's 40th anniversary, which seems a very long time ago, given it started in 1984. So it's an important year in all kinds of ways. And it's also very exciting to have Margaret Busby, who was one of the judging panel in the prize's inaugural year, which celebrated its 25th birthday, here today. And we're just going to have a very informal conversation, going down memory lane in a way, talking about the prize, talking about Wasafiri, and in a way how we, have progressed over the last 15 years in terms of what's been going on with literary prizes, how Wasafiri has progressed, what the general culture has been doing. So for those of you who don't know about Margaret, and I can't imagine it would be very many of you, I'm just going to do a very brief intro, which is just to say, Margaret's really been involved in so many different cultural organizations and institutions. She really needs very little introduction. She's worked as a publisher, an editor, an interviewer, a reviewer, a lyricist, a scriptwriter on radio and television. And apart from this little prize, she's also judged a number of prestigious literary prizes, including the Booker, and served on the board of a number of major organizations, including Wasafiri Magazine and the Royal Literary Fund and the Africa Centre and many, many more. So I think
that's enough, Susheila.
Yeah, and you're now president of English Pen. So we are, I think, you've done so much. It's just fantastic to have you here. And it's fantastic you're chairing the New Writing Prize this year. You've had a very close relationship with Wasafiri. You've been chair of the board, advisor almost since its inception, and supported me certainly throughout its long life. Can you say
it was really can I just say to have been on the judging panel for the inaugural edition of the prize was really something very special. Alongside, well, I think you were the chair, weren't you, Susheila?
Yeah.
And there was also Blake Morrison and Mimi Calvati. But what I wanted to ask you specifically was why you had this brilliant idea to start the Wasafiri New Writing Prize, as it was known.
Well, there were lots and lots of reasons. It was the 25th birthday. We were, of course, dependent on Arts Council funding, but we were trying to expand Wasafiri from being a literary magazine to becoming an arts organization. And one of the ways of doing that was also to run other events. And we were very lucky in the 25th year. And we just moved from Queen Mary at that point to the Open University, to offices in Camden. We were very lucky in that year to not only have the Standard Arts Council grant, but we managed to get a touring grant to celebrate the 25th anniversary. So we had a little bit of extra money. We appointed quite a prestigious PR agency from that money, who many people will know, called Coleman Getty. And they said, apart from, doing all the events we were doing, it would be good to run a few other things. And because we'd been wanting to open opportunities for new writers, we decided it was a good moment to launch this prize. And, it was a very, very big moment. We had a celebration at the South Bank Centre when the winners of the prize received their awards, in the company, should I say, of writers like Kamar Brathwaite, Grace Nichols, John Agard, Bernardine Evaristo, many, many writers who are, extremely well-known names. And that was, of course, something that we thought about with the prize from the beginning, was that little-known or up-and-coming writers should be awarded the prize by distinguished judges. So even that first panel, of course, with yourself, Mimi Calvati, Blake Morrison, and it carried on with people like Marina Warner, Maya Jaggi, Inua Elems. I mean, I could reel off a stellar list of judges, not because the winners were any less stellar by the time they'd, gone on to publish, but because the whole idea of it was to have these well-known writers or writers that were going to be well-known to really promote the writing of people who needed the opportunities to be published. So that was one of the reasons we started it. And we really set it up to be a very open and inclusive prize to support new writers. There were no limits on age, no limits on gender, no limits on nationality or background. And it covered 3 genres: life writing, poetry, and fiction. So I think...
Yeah. And you chaired the judging panel for most of the time up until about, I think, 2019, when you stepped down as editor of editor-in-chief of the magazine. What sort of changes have you seen perhaps in the submissions, or why do you think there's still a need to have the prize?
I think the path to literary success can sometimes seem elusive, I think, even for those with talent. So, I mean, I think in a way, there's always a need for prizes because there's always writing and there's always new writers who want to get recognized. I think, oddly enough, in 2009, it was actually quite an optimistic moment compared to where we are now in some ways. There was more funding around. Wasafiri was really, I think, moving ahead. It had got mainstream funding from the Arts Council. So had many other cultural organizations. It was a kind of buoyant moment in terms of literature. So I think, oddly enough, it was a very good moment to launch it. But now, in the 15 years since, I think we've done lots of other things. I think we've expanded. Originally, it was more limited in terms of the entries we were getting from all over the world. I think the more Wasafiri's expanded to cover areas such as the Middle East, to cover Brazil, to cover, Mozambique, I could name many, many regions of the world. We get entries from 5 continents. The numbers of entries have increased. The fact that we have also set up side benefits, like we have an arrangement with the literary consultancy who mentor writers who win the prize. So there's been kind of lots and lots of benefits. And I think the fact that the writers get to be published in this magazine, which has sort of grown probably in reputation, is also something that's very special about it. I think what's changed, I don't really know. I don't think anything has changed other than that we get more and more submissions, actually.
And many of those who won the different categories have gone on to even greater success, as you say, and have been published. But there's also that element of mentoring, which comes about because of the prize. How important do you think that is, or how does that manifest itself?
I think it's really important because quite often, I mean, with this prize, obviously writers are just submitting, maybe 3 or 4 poems, or they may be submitting 1 short story or a piece of life writing, but they may have a whole drawer of work at home, which needs editing, dealing with, bringing to fruition. And that's happened in the case of several. So, for example, Danielle Boudu Fortune, she won was a poetry winner in 2016, later published a collection with People Tree Press. Or Roida Amin, who's one of the 2009 winners, published an anthology later. And indeed, many of the writers we have now really say they benefit from the mentoring that they get. And it's a good arrangement where they get special focus following the prize. I think it's also great when the prize is announced, because quite often we've done events where one of the judges will read one of the pieces that's won and comment on it. And that's also, I think, quite moving and quite beneficial for the writers who then establish a relationship possibly with that judge and the piece of work that's being commented on. And it's just such a unique opportunity, really, for writers to get noticed, because, of course, the normal story is you submit hundreds of poems or short stories to magazines and you don't hear anything. You just get a lot of rejections. So I think it's useful. And I think it's also useful in terms of the fact that many of the judges at those award ceremonies talk about how they got published and how difficult it was. And it's good for new writers to hear that even the famous have submitted things that have gotten rejected in their careers and still do.
Yeah, yeah.
And still do.
And when I was a publisher, there were many things that I published that had been rejected by scores of publishers before we took them on Alison Busby. So there is that feeling of optimism. Rejection isn't the end of the story.
No. But Margaret, you've judged so many prizes in your long career in publishing, and you've read so many manuscripts in publishing. In your view, what relevance do you think these new writing prizes, I mean, more broadly, have for literature and writers today? I mean, do you think they matter? I mean, there's so many prizes now.
I think they do matter, and in a way, to me, prizes are important because they're a way of encouraging people who want to write, who can write, who can improve as writers, and as you say, who may have faced a lot of rejection. And there is never any guarantee of who the winner is going to be. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not only important who the winner is, but who the people who've entered are, who've been longlisted, who've been shortlisted. It's all about encouraging people to write as well as encouraging people to read. So I think for me, that's the benefit of prizes. It's a way of enriching literature as a whole. And you never know what it is that you're going to be asked to read, be asked to judge, be asked to comment on. So all of those things add up to really quite an exciting experience or a prospect, because you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't necessarily even know what you're going to be looking for or what's going to be submitted. So
absolutely,
to me, it's an adventure.
Yeah. I mean, just to tell a story, which I meant to say when you asked me about the first year, and you probably remember this because you were on the panel. But I suppose one of the things I should have said about the prize, which is very distinctive about the Queen Mary Wasafiri New Writing Prize, is that it's blind. We read the entries, or we read the entries. I don't do it anymore, but we read the entries blind. And I did it for a very long time. And that very first year was just quite amazing, because one of the pieces, unfortunately, this person who was actually a dear friend has since passed away, but one of the entries for that prize was a piece of light writing by a writer called Bartmore Gilbert. And as it turned out, it was a story about his growing up in Tanganyika, as it then was, now Tanzania, and being in an English boarding school and hearing the dreadful news that his father had been involved in a plane crash, and being, the headmaster sent him back to class, basically, pretty much almost immediately. It was a sort of ghastly story, and it's the beginning of a long, actually, memoir that he wrote later about his father's being a terrorist, which he didn't realize, a kind of terrorist in the Indian army, colonial Indian army, which he never knew. But at the moment we revealed the names in the judging meeting, Blake Morrison and I both knew Bart well. We both knew this story. We had not recognized it. And we just looked at each other and went, Bart, like that. So I think that kind of, responds to, in a way, what you're saying about the excitement and and what literature does, of course, because it does transport you. You don't know necessarily or identify a particular thing with something that you might recognize, or a person you might recognize.
Yeah. No, I think it is true. I mean, there's that sense of possibility, you don't know what you're going to get. But there are also prizes, as we know, that specify particular demographics because of the inadequacies, if you like, of the publishing industry and the difficulties of some writers to get a foothold on the industry. So, I mean, you have writers, I mean, whether it's the Kane Prize or the SI Leeds Prize, which is for African and Asian women in the UK, or the Jalak Prize. These are all prizes that have particular remits and particular areas that they're trying to showcase. And it's the same. I mean, you mentioned earlier anthologies, and it's really similar to the reason why I edited the anthologies that I have done. The Daughters of Africa in 1992 and New Daughters of Africa in 2019, because there are areas of writing and writers who don't necessarily get the same opportunities or enough opportunities. That's probably what I mean, that they get some opportunities, but not enough. So in those anthologies, I wanted to say, okay, here are some writers who you may have heard of, but there are many others who you won't have heard of because of the limitations of what's allowed to be published, if you like. So I think it's a combination of initiatives like the Wasafiri Prize and other prizes and other anthologies and other initiatives that people keep coming up with in order to make literature richer. And in a way, also to pass on the baton, not to have things static, to have new generations being inspired or mentored by what's gone ahead, what's gone before. So, I mean, is that something that resonates with you? I mean, I know that you started Wasafiri quite a while ago, and you have now, in a way, stepped back. Though it's great that you're still involved in a really important way. I mean, how do you see where we've come from to where we are now, and what the Wasafiri Prize is directing us towards, if you like?
Well, I think in a way, just picking up on what you were saying about anthologies, because I think that's really important, because, you know, whoever the writers are, I mean, and of course you've done the whole, obviously the two Daughters of Africa anthologies were really important in this way, but anthologies also, when I first started Wasafiri in the 80s, some of the writers, some women writers especially, which the Women's Press were publishing, were published in anthologies. And people thought, oh, this was just a very minor publication, you know, they weren't really going to get noticed. But the point was that, first of all, they were published, and secondly, their work did get noticed, and it went on later to be, you know, cited or referred to by other people. I think there was one anthology I'm trying to think of by a critic called Rhonda Cobham. I don't know if you remember that one, Watchers and Seekers. But if you look at the contest pages of that, I mean, there are lots of people there who went on to become quite well-known writers. And I think anthologies also perform a different function in the sense, and can be compared to Wasafiri, which is, I think, the point you were making, that it's a kind of, well, Wasafiri, of course, is a mix of critical articles and creative pieces and reviews and interviews, but the New Writing Prize entries get published as part of that curation. They get noticed, and you know, as you say, there's kind of buzz for the shortlist. It gets noticed. The shortlist gets put up on the website, and of course, we have the whole digital thing now as well, which further enhances the marketing. So I think, I mean, in terms of how things have changed, I think it's still very much, the prize is still very much a form of a stepping up and enabling of a new writer. But then there are also, you know, writers that are, you know, we've had writers that have jumped from winning something very early on to becoming winning a very major prize, like Pascal Petit, who won one of the poetry prizes quite early on, and then, you know, won the Michael Ondaatje Prize later. So I think there's always a kind of continuum between getting published in the first place and enhancing a writer's future career. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with being a writer who writes short stories and produces a collection of short stories and never writes a novel. You know, they may just write these short pieces, like, you know, someone who was very involved with Wasafiri for years, Amir Hussein, who writes brilliant collections of short stories and pieces. He's published many short stories in Wasafiri's. So I think it really just depends on the writer, but the main thing is that it enables them a step up. It enables them, or at least whenever I've taught creative writing, all the advice has always been, or in fact done creative writing classes myself, all the advice has always been, get something published, and then you can put it on your, you know, you can put it on your CV and say, I won the Wasafiri New Writing Prize, or I won this prize or that prize, and then publishers notice it, agents notice it. So I think
don't you think it's also important that they become part of the Wasafiri community, if you like?
Yeah.
Being published in the magazine, meeting other writers, and it sort of expands their world. I mean, given that the prize is unique in that it doesn't specify particular ages, genders, nationalities, it also brings people together in a way that's unique.
Yes, and I think particularly with the Wasafiri Prize, it's, you know, I think one of the specifications is that the piece hasn't been published elsewhere, and they haven't published a full collection. So it is a new piece, and it's also, of course, in a broader sense, a way of Wasafiri fulfilling its own mission of discovering new writers, discovering new talent. So I suppose I'm going to ask you the inevitable question now, but which you've been asked hundreds of times, but I think it's interesting. Obviously, you know, the prize landscape is changing, and particularly in the current arts climate in the UK, where funding is being reduced for the arts, you know, the arts are under threat. But what are your thoughts on what's going on now in the contemporary publishing world and the continuing gatekeeping that writers of color face? I mean, ostensibly things have changed. That's what all the publishers say. And we, of course, saw a big rush of prizes and Black writers winning prizes following Black Lives Matter. And that's not a criticism at all, but I'm just wondering what you think about where we are now in terms of the publishing world. Do you think in the mainstream publishing world that people's attitudes have actually changed or are beginning to change?
Well, I hope you're right. I hope they have changed, and I hope there are more people beginning to get a better idea of what the situation is. But to me, there is still so much more to be done. The publishing industry talks a lot about diversity and inclusivity, but in fact, it isn't as inclusive or diverse as it could be. And to me, there's also a sort of division, so that quite often it's seen as a us and them situation, so that we are the writers and we have to get published by them. So that's where the gatekeeping element comes in. And that's why I think it's important that within all publishing companies, whether or not they're large or small independents, there is a range of talent, of background, of locality, so that you don't get a I'm not quite making myself clear, but you see what I'm saying. So you don't get the whole industry with one view of what is good literature, or how to deal with literature that's published, or how to sell it or publicize it. You have to have a view that comes from everybody who's involved in writing, who could be involved in publishing, who should be involved in publishing. And that doesn't mean that you have to choose one or the other. If you think of somebody like Toni Morrison, who was both a brilliant writer, but also worked as an editor within the publishing industry. So you can be both. And I think we need to encourage people to see publishing as an option, as well as to see writing as an option. And perhaps this is something that will be ongoing. It certainly needs to change for the better, although there are, of course, there are many publishers, or certainly some publishers, who've always done the right thing in terms of publishing good literature wherever it comes from, without specifying that it's a special favor that's being done to this ethnicity or that. So I hope that things in general will continue to improve, and that this is not just a trend that's been sparked by something such as the Black Lives Matter movement.
I think, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, because in a sense, it kind of relates to education in a way also, because obviously something like, or a magazine like Wasafiri, which has been fighting from the beginning to make clear that all writing should be part of the so-called mainstream. That is, there's no distinction between minorities and mainstreams in the sense that we're just celebrating good quality writing. And I've always got very irritated when people say, oh, you're the magazine that publishes the ethnic minorities, and which used to be an absolutely classic one. It's almost a bit like, where do you come from? It was always Wasafiri, Wasa what? Oh, that's the Black or Asian magazine, or whatever it was. So, but what I think is important about something like this prize and education is that it's actually trying to educate the publishing industry to open their eyes or put on different spectacles in terms of reading these kinds of writers. And I think one of the things about the prize is that it's so inclusive in terms of the range of writers that are celebrated, the fact that they're blind read, so nobody really knows where they come from or what their angle is kind of quite an education experience for the judges, I think, as well as the,
absolutely.
Yeah, the people winning. So I think it's important. And I think increasingly, because Wasafiri has now developed something of a track record of discovering new writers, and has, quite a few people who published early in their careers have gone on to become extremely well known. I think publishers are beginning to look at Wasafiri and to look at the New Writing Prize entrants who get published, to look at these new voices in a slightly different way, and think, well, these people must be worth reading, rather than just dismissing them from the outset. But, so, I mean, just linking to the sort of educational side, and obviously Queen Mary is sponsoring Wasafiri, as is Routledge now, but the Open University used to, because the funding has always come from universities as well as the Arts Council. You yourself founded, seeded, and launched the Margaret Busby New Daughters of Africa Award, which annually funds a woman student from Africa to study at SOAS. So that's also looking to another generation, isn't it, to trying to build something. I mean,
and that, again, that came out of the idea of publishing an anthology that would have an ongoing effect, because all the writers who were included in New Daughters of Africa waived their fees to contribute towards this award. So you're passing on information, you're passing the baton, you're inspiring other people. And one of the interesting things is that the first winner of the award, the Margaret Busby New Daughters of Africa Award, was a writer from Kenya who went on to win the Kane Prize.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
Again, there are connections between different ways of empowering writers, different ways of enriching literature. And for me, the Wasafiri Prize is something that we have to celebrate and we have to look forward to, because you don't know what is going to come out of it, or how it's going to affect literature or other writing around the world. So it's something that I am always glad is still existing and was started in the first place, and that it still sustains a great quality of writing. It is something we should all celebrate.
I mean, do you think there are any other ways in which new writing prizes like this could achieve more profile in the contemporary sort of marketplace, if you like, of literary prizes? Because there's so many now.
There are so many, but this, as you say, it is different in that it doesn't specify entrants have to come from particular silos of gender or age or nationality, and it's read blind. So what we end up judging is quality.
Yeah, which is the key
impact and what it feels to read these pieces of writing. And for me, you don't necessarily know in advance what's going to make you choose this piece or that piece. It's to do with how you engage with it, how you discuss it with the other judges, perhaps.
Yes.
The different things that go into a winner being a winner are intangible. You can't predict, unpredictable. And they're not necessarily ruling out all those other contributions that didn't win or submissions that didn't win, but they're just showing you how exciting it can be when you remove the barriers, when you open the doors, when you unlock the gates and let people in. So I think we have to hope that perhaps it's the media who could publicize the prize more, see what's being done in this unique way and why it should be encouraged.
Yes, I think and I think the diversity of the judges that, there's been over the years, over the 15 years, there just have been a huge range of judges, extremely talented judges. And in a way, for the writers who win, it adds to the prestige of winning this prize, that it's got such, beginning to get such a literary lineage of people who are willing to give their time to support it and to support new writing. So I think that's also really important. And, and it's, as I say, to go back to where we started, it's great. You've agreed to chair this, we've kind of come 15 years on, and it's the 40th anniversary, which is a long life in a little magazine. But I wonder, and this is just a general question before we end, really, and it's something I could ask myself as well from being on literary panels, is how do you feel, when you're judging a literary prize, how do you arrive at a decision with the other panel members? How do you get consensus, particularly if it's cross-genre?
I don't think that's something that can be answered in advance.
No.
Particularly when you don't know personally who the fellow judges are, because you sometimes you have to take a measure of each of the judge's personality or they of yours, and you maybe you all agree, maybe you disagree, but willing to discuss. So I don't think I've ever judged a prize where there've been tantrum thrown by the judges, or people have stormed out, or there's been any great disagreement. There have been differences of opinion, which we've worked through in different ways. So I think that's always a possibility, that you can have differences of opinion, but you can respect other people's judgment, and you can find a way to reach a consensus, which is not to dismiss everything else that isn't a winner.
It's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, from all the years I was chairing the Wasafiri New Writing Prize, which I did, well, I think I did it from the 2009 to 2019 when I stopped. What was amazing to me, in a way, given the range of work we looked at, was how, when we had that final judges meeting, when we sifted it and kind of got up to the shortlist, how much actual consensus there often was amongst the judges who hadn't spoken to each other, who came from completely different angles. And in a way, is reassuring in terms of how really good writing is assessed, because fiction judges are also reading poetry, poetry judges are reading life. At those last meetings, you're having to read all of it. So to pick the overall winner in each category is quite something, because then you're listening to the views of everybody. So I think it's quite incredible that there is consensus. And of course, I don't know, from the prizes I've judged, and they've been varied, it's also quite subjective, I've always found, in some ways, in terms of people's particular interests, you know, which is why I think it's quite good having these kind of revolving judges every year, because it, you know, it gets a breadth, complete breadth of reading. I don't know if there's anything else, Margaret, we should be talking about, but what do you think?
Well, I think talking about the judges as you just were, I think want to give credit to the people who choose the judges.
Yeah.
Because that also makes a difference. And you know, if all the judges were exactly the same every year, you would get a really possibly quite boring result every year. But that never happens, and it's unlikely to happen this year. And I'm looking forward to discussions with the other judges, and it's all going to end up in an exciting finale, I hope.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing who the winners are, and I'm sure it'll be exciting, and I'm sure there'll be, well, probably more entries this year as it's the 40th anniversary. I'm sure it'll be, as always, a very exciting outcome. And
It's an honor to have been chosen as one of the people to have a part in that outcome. I'm looking forward to reading entries that surprise me, that excite me, that move me, that challenge me. But beyond saying that, I feel quite open-minded about what may or may not bring about a consensus. For me, when you are reading something for the first time, particularly by someone who hasn't yet published a book or been acknowledged in a major way, it's an opportunity to see something before it's been impacted by a lot of other prejudices that are there in the literary world. So it's a privilege to see something that may have a special magic, even though it may not be perfect in editorial terms or whatever, because it's a new writer or a new piece of writing. It may still have a quality that is recognizable as something really special. So it's not about something that's perfectly punctuated or perfectly whatever. It's about something that has that magic that makes you want to read and reread and keep reading. So I'm looking for something that will hold my attention and something that will make me look forward to reading more by that writer or those writers.